Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Things have changed since I've been in undergrad. I look at you and I'm like, oh my God, they're so young and so all beautiful. What is wrong with you people? So anyway, it's great to be here. And I did notice, one of the first things I did notice was, in the old days, we still take paper and pen, and all of you have laptops now. Things have changed. I did teach at William & Mary Law School for a couple of semesters on immigration law. That was back in 2004, and there was a big transition from using paper to a lot of people would bring laptops, and I was somewhat suspicious. I didn't think they were taking notes. I thought they were playing games. But anyway, I am pretty sure that all of you are studious and would be taking somewhat notes. Obviously, what I'm going to bring to you today is what is a real life experience. And I know that this is, you guys are majoring in business, I guess, business administration, accounting, marketing, that kind of stuff, correct? So any of you interested in going to law school? Because you look like you guys are all dressed to be lawyers.
No one wants to go to law school.
Law school is great. It's great.
Sarah wants to go to law school.
Sarah, okay, there you go. So law school is a great place to be, and I think, most of us have dreams of becoming an attorney. I was one of those people. But there are people that just go to law school, and it's an incredible, they teach you a lot of skills, and you don't have to practice law. But the law school itself, I think, has a lot of tools that help you in furtherance of your career. So I'm going to talk about scenario one, case number one. This is the tropical smoothie case. And I'm going to just assume that most of you are ages from 18 to 22, probably had some internships here and there, and probably not just had a real career. So I'm going to just give you a scenario, and we're going to have this conversation back and forth. I'm not a great lecturer, but I can have a dialogue with every single one of you, hopefully. And I will call on you if it seems like you're not really paying attention to me. So keep that in mind. So even though you may not be paying attention, you should look like you're paying attention, okay? I do have children your age, so I am somewhat familiar with certain behaviors, okay? Let's say that. All right, I'm gonna give you like a few minutes to about case number one. This is the case of a tropical smoothie, and you think this is, anomaly. It's not true. This is pretty, happens, what usually happens in a small business. So Mr. Buyer is 46-year-old. He's a librarian at the Newport News Library. What does that tell you when I say he's a librarian? That means he's probably, used to a certain curriculum and schedule, right? Probably like a 9-to-5 job or fixed schedules and that kind of stuff. So he's a librarian. So he probably reads a lot, knows a lot about a lot of things. Let's see how he does. Now, his grandmother left him $200,000 in her will. So he's got $200,000. In the spirit of true entrepreneurship, decided to investigate operating his own business. Now, we all have fantasies about being our own bosses. So if you work for somebody else, you're actually, you're catering to somebody else's schedule. So if you own your own business, there's a lot of great things about having your own business. You can wake up whenever you want to. You can take a vacation whenever you want to. You can get off whenever you want to. You don't have to answer to anybody. But that is probably not the way to have a successful business. But anyway, so there's a lot to be said being your own boss. So he wants to be his own boss. He goes by Tropical Smoothie, buys his sandwiches, smoothies almost every day. So he's a huge fan of Tropical Smoothie since he knows the product, because he knows all the flavors of the smoothie. He wants to invest in Tropical Smoothie. Now, Mr. Seller is the owner of a Tropical Smoothie at Warwick Boulevard. He's operated there for 3 years. He paid $240,000 for his business to Miss Fulmer about 3 years ago. He's 62 years old. He wants to retire now. He's 62. He's going to be able to draw Social Security. He wants to retire. But now he's paid $240,000 for his business to Miss Fulmer. So If you represent Mr. Buyer, he's a librarian member, what kind of argument would you make? What concerns do you have? Mr. Buyer comes to you and you're a business consultant and say, well, I have $200,000 that grandmother left me. I want to buy a business. So, what do you think? What are the first things that you want to talk to Mr. Buyer about? Yes.
I'd be kind of concerned because he's a librarian and not really a business owner, and he doesn't seem like he probably has the kind of business skills he needs to run a branch of a corporation like Counteroffer.
Okay. So, do you want to talk him out of buying the business? Remember, this is his dream.
I don't know. I would probably, try to get him to be very cautious and like really do some research into like what he's actually getting himself into, because it sounds like he's looking for more of something that you pay a one-time, like you pay $200,000 and then it kind of just makes you money on its own, which that's not what a business is.
Okay. So, you brought a good thing about research. What kind of research would you do in the spirit of purchasing this? Because if you're a business consultant, think of it this way. The last thing you want to do is like, Mr. Buyer, look, hey, you're a librarian, you don't know anything about business. Okay, give me your $200,000. I will invest the money for you and don't buy the business. That's not the spirit of true ownership. So as a business consultant, you want to make this work, right? So back there, what are some of the concerns you have, or what are research things you want to do?
I would probably research how that particular location does, like financially.
Okay.
What their consumers do, and like how often that they're like just how much money they're making versus how much they're spending.
Very good. And how do you do that?
You would look at their profits versus like how much rent they pay and how much the materials cost.
Correct.
And what they pay their employees. And then just take you gotta compare and compare what you spend versus what you make.
Okay. And I think that's an excellent point. That's what I would do. But how do you do that? How do you ask for those documents? Is that a cool thing to say to Mr. Seller? Okay, I represent Mr. Buyer, and we would like to know your financial statements. That's what you're asking for, right? Do you think it's a cool thing to say, we want to see your financial statements?
He probably wouldn't give them to you.
Right.
If he wants to sell it, then he also might try to help you buy it. So.
The thing is, though, if he doesn't have anything to hide, he'll just be like, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if he has something to hide, he'll be like, nah. And then you know that there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you represent Mr. Seller, and then in a business consultant, you guys come and say, okay, we represent Mr. Buyer, and we want to know how well the business is doing. Do you think you can, do you want to give us your financial statements? Yes.
Would you actually have to go through Mr. Seller though, because he's only this one particular tropical smoothie is a part of a bigger organization. So
Mhm.
if you just go to the parent and then ask them, because they would have information about how all of their stores are doing. I understand, but that would be another thing to research into, even if you have to go to him.
Okay.
directly.
And that's an excellent point too. So what is a tropical smoothie? Does anybody know? It's a franchise. So do you think it's a part of franchise? So do you think if you went to the tropical smoothie, the big company, the organization, hey, I'm interested in that little franchise tropical smoothie on Warwick Boulevard, and they all have, franchises have all numbers, like number 564, where my client's interested. So go ahead and shoot me an email with their financials. Do you think that happens? Why not?
They have so many, this is one of the smaller stores, I'm guessing, and they just have so many to manage that they're not necessarily going to focus in on one particular store.
Yeah. Anybody? That's good. That's a good point. Anybody? Yes.
They might not want like someone from outside the organization knowing if it is doing poorly, because if anyone can acquire that information, it's a privately traded company, so like you wouldn't necessarily want it to be public knowledge, like all the financial statements and stuff.
Right. Does the franchisor, the parent company up there, would they release this information to anybody? Probably not. There's probably some kind of an agreement between the franchisee and the franchisor. The franchisor does not know who you are. And if you were the franchisee, let's say you're the Mr. Seller, do you want your information to be released to just about anybody? So one of the first things that I think, if you represent the seller, what are you going to ask for? What do you want? You have somebody, Mr. Buyer is coming in, you represent Mr. Buyer, and he says, my client is interested in your business. If you represent Mr. Seller, what's the first thing you're going to want? Anybody? Because, well, you want money. Absolutely, you want money. But to get there, you have some room, right? You have, no one's going to just hand you the money. So if you represent the seller, the first thing the seller wants to know is, how interested are you in purchasing my client's business? So this is part of that negotiation. So of course they're going to say, well, how much do you have? How much do you have in mind? All those things. But the buyer, this is where it comes to about, the corporate books and financial, that's part of due diligence. And if you represent a buyer or a seller, especially the buyer, you want due diligence. So you want to know what's going on. If you represent the seller, yes, you want the money, but what do you want? You want commitment. Just like any relationship, you want that ring on your finger, okay? You want commitment. So what is that commitment in a business world? It starts with a C. Contract. Yes, you want a contract. But if you represent the buyer, you don't want, the contract is okay, but you don't want to give them too much on that contract, right? So this is part of the negotiation. So you can do a contract, or you can do memorandum of interest of purchasing, something in writing to show the rest of the world there are two people that are engaged in talking, interested, and that shows commitment on each side. So on the contract, because now you represent the buyer, you haven't seen anything. You've seen the store. So, you can see Mr. Seller's making his smoothies. There's menus, there's tables and chairs. So what do you want on that agreement? Because you don't want to give them the money unless your needs are satisfied, correct? So what are you going to do on the contract? You said it earlier. What do you want on that contract? You want to see their financial records, right? So you're going to see contingencies on there. So you can do just memorandum because you still haven't negotiated on the full price yet, right? But you want to see financial records. So first thing you want to say is, we'd be interested in purchasing this if the following things happen. So you want to see financial records. How many years of financial records do you want to see? Anybody? Yes?
Probably like at least 5.
5, yes. But how long did Mr. Seller have that business for? 3. So you're going to ask for? 3. Okay, so what kind of financial records do you want? Income statement. Excuse me? Balance sheet. What else? Mm-hmm.
Cash flow, profits and loss.
Okay. Do you think small businesses have all that readily available?
Yes.
Some do, yes. What's the first thing you're going to ask for? What does he readily have available?
Bank transactions.
Bank. And what's the first thing that's easily available that you know is good? federal tax returns. Income statements are good, but he may be a corporation, right? If he's a corporation or limited liability company, he would have he would have the corporate tax returns for the corporation, the business, and then he would have his separate personal tax returns. Do you really care about his personal tax returns? If he can get it, that's good. But you want to know how that business is doing. And the first thing you want to know is the one that he filed with the Internal Revenue Service. Because, think about it. Would he inflate the numbers of his gross sales? No, because if he did $5 million versus $500,000, you're going to pay a huge amount of taxes. He's not going to inflate the numbers. But if you do personal financial records that you hire your own accountant, do your tax returns, your balance sheet or cash flow, how trustworthy is that? Because it's going to look the most beneficial to Mr. Seller. But the one that he files with the Internal Revenue Service is probably pretty good numbers, okay? In fact, he may deflate the numbers so that he'll pay less taxes. Do you know anybody that wants to pay taxes? Not many. Not many people want to pay taxes. If he can write off some expenses, most people will. Okay. So you're doing your diligence. So you got your federal tax returns. What else do you want on that contract? This is all negotiation. Yes.
You'd want it so that you're not going to go through this entire contract negotiation process and then at the last minute another buyer steps in and buys the business.
Yes.
You want some sort of exclusive, negotiation.
Correct. So you basically say this is a contract and you're going to have yourself somewhat of a due diligence and you're going to prevent any other purchaser from coming into the picture and overbidding you, right? So you want that on the contract. And can you put that stuff on the contract, by the way? Is it legal? Yes? Anybody? Yes? Well, do you think it's legal?
Yeah, I think that, as long as both parties are willing to put it on the contract, it should be.
Yeah. Anything, you can put anything on the contract as long as it's not a criminal activity. You can put anything on there. So you say, okay, no other the seller is prohibited from negotiating with third parties. So you can only deal with you, the buyer. So you looked at his tax returns. What other stuff do you want? Now, you're buying the business. What are you actually buying when you say, okay, Mr. Buyer wants to buy a tropical smoothie on Warwick Boulevard? What are you buying? What do you think you're buying?
The building.
Hmm?
The building.
Do you think you're buying the building?
Well, you're buying his lease with it and his rights to the franchise.
Okay, so do you put that in the contract?
Yes.
Okay. Are you buying the building?
No, but you're taking over his lease.
Okay.
The lease is longer than 3 years.
All right, so what do you put on that contract? So you say contingent on,
The lease being transferred, the rights being transferred.
excellent. The lease, because, why is that important? Lease is not, part of the tropical smoothie, but what are you buying? A business is all about what? Location, location, location. So the tropical smoothie on Warwick Boulevard is popular because we have all these CNU students, going in and out and all that. What happens? You just bought the business, and then you didn't check.
The
Land.
company could up the rent on you.
Right. So what are you looking for? So what do you put on the contract? When you do this contract with Mr. Seller, you represent the buyer, you want to say what on the contract?
Transfer the lease to finish out the lease.
So, right? You want to say this asset, we call it asset purchase agreement in a business thing. So it's asset purchase. You want to say this is contingent upon the landlord or lessor agreeing to transfer to the buyer. But you can put that on there, but what do you really want to do with that also? Yes,
Without raise of rent, like with the same rent price.
with the same rent. So what are you looking for? What do you want? You, under part of that investigation due diligence, you are asking to see a copy of the lease agreement. That's when you're buying a business, that's probably one of the most important things that you're getting, because you have to look at the lease agreement. Now, can you change the terms of the lease agreement? Anybody?
Depends.
Yes. In any legal world, everything is, the answer is, it depends. Depends. So you have to get a copy of the lease. And then you have to go through it with the buyer. Because remember, Mr. Buyer is a librarian. He knows a lot about books, but he may not know about lease agreements or tax returns of other businesses. So you have to go through the whole lease agreement. And what is the first thing you want to know is like, how many years does he have left on that, right? So if he's buying it, you want a long term. And how much is it? How much is rent? What are the other things you want on that lease agreement when you're negotiating on part of the buyer of the tropical smoothie? Think about it. You know, when you rent an apartment, what do you get? You get like a, yes?
I would want to make sure that all like the tables, the smoothie machines, like all of the equipment stays in the tropical smoothie.
Right?
She's talking about
On the, yes.
Like for the lease, you'd want to check up on like water and electrical and like how much he pays for utilities.
Right. You want those things, but under the lease, who pay? Usually in a business setting, the water, the utility, all that is usually paid by the tenant. The landlords usually don't pay that unless you're in like a big like office space, and then utilities could be included. But those are things you want to look under the.
something breaks, if like something like a window breaks, he's gonna pay for it. That kind of
Right, you want, and there's really not much you can do if you're assuming somebody else's lease, but you want to know who's responsible for utilities, who's responsible if the window breaks. But if you own a business, such as Tropical Smoothie, what is one of the most important things that you want to pay attention to under the lease agreement?
How much rent is?
Right, you want to know about the rent, how many years have left. What else you want to know? Let's say he had a 5-year lease agreement with the landlord. So Mr. Buyer had operated for 3 years. That gives him what? 2 more years to operate. What are you looking for? Because you want beyond 2 years. What do you want?
Like, say like a renegotiation agreement.
Excuse me?
Negotiation agreement, like agreement that they talked to them first, maybe. I don't know. But like re-renting the space, like what's the process for?
Re-renting? Yeah, it's called option to renew. It's called option to renew, and you want to know if there's an option. 2 years goes by very, very quickly. When you're 18, 2 years seems like a lifetime, but when you're operating a business, 2 years go just like this. And so you don't want to be out, because what are you buying? You're buying the assets of that business, but you're also getting leasehold. Why? Because of that location. So you want to know if you have an option to renew that lease agreement. Usually, and you want that option, because you only have 2 years. And if you can't negotiate with the landlord, let's say you're paying $5,000 a month now, and 2 years from now, the landlord looks at it like, wow, you're doing a really great business. I think I'm going to charge you $10,000 a month. Is it legal? Anybody? Why wouldn't it be legal? Yes, it's legal. The landlord can charge you $10,000 a month. So you want some kind of an option with a cap. Say the landlord will, agrees, the parties agree, unless there's a breach of an agreement, the landlord agrees to renew the lease to the tenant with 3% escalation clause every year. That means they can increase it by 3%. But there's been many situations where there's no cap, where the landlord just decide to increase the rent skyrocket, and it's perfectly legal. What is the landlord saying? The value of that location is very, very high, because it is always about location. So you want that on there. What is the other things if you're a tenant or potential tenant? You look at the lease, because you can't change the terms, but you want to know what you're getting yourself into. Part of what due diligence. Due diligence is one of the most important things in negotiation of business. So what else you want on the lease besides option to renew, how much it is, and all that? Okay, Virginia, it gets incredibly hot during summer. What do you want?
AC.
Yes. And so if you own a tropical smoothie business, what do you want happen during summer? You do not want the HVAC to break. So what do you want on that lease agreement? Yes.
Like terms saying a certain amount of time things will be fixed by, so that if it did break, it wouldn't go like 2 weeks being broken.
Right.
And then the business had to be
What if it says, and this has happened, yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say, see if like the property had property insurance, or like who would be paying for like any breaks or any like machine malfunctions or anything like that.
That's right. Now, would it surprise you on some lease agreements, business lease agreements, that says tenant is responsible for all maintenance and repairs? Would that surprise anybody? What does that happen when it's 100 degrees out in the middle of July in Newport News, Virginia, and the HVAC does not work? What does that mean?
Means the tenant has to pay to get it fixed.
The tenant has to pay to get it fixed. Do you know how expensive those things are? It is not cheap. It's totally different from residential. Those commercial units are very expensive. So you want to see if the landlord is responsible for HVAC units. Now, can you try to negotiate with the landlord as a prospective purchaser of this business? Probably not. But will it hurt you to ask? Doesn't. Yes.
You might want to see like when it was last replaced also, so that it's not like 25 years old and like expecting to break soon.
Very good. Yeah, those are things, it's part of the due diligence. And these documents, you could either get it from the landlord or from the current tenant, which is Mr. Seller. And then, because what is motivating factor for Mr. Seller? He wants to sell so he can move on to Florida, right? So can you really rely on what he says? But probably not. But you can ask for documentation. He'll say, oh, it's no big deal, it never breaks. But you want to ask him, when was the last time? When did you get it replaced? Do you have any documentation? He's only run the business for 3 years. You would think he has some record of those things, right? Okay, so those are really great things. Now, so what other things as a representative of the buyer would you be interested in about whether Mr. Seller did a great job or not? Yes.
You probably want to know like how well like the equipment was taken care of, the facility was taken care of, how well like the customer rating is on the store.
Yeah. Excellent. So, and these are things you don't have to do, but what do? You can look up Google review. Yes.
You probably want to know like their employee satisfaction, like too. So if they had issues with how the store was being run, you could like help them, and then they maybe would stay longer.
Right. You may want to talk to the current employees. It's always good to talk to people. So you can just get it's always, you could get that disgruntled employee too. So you have to mix the good, the bad, and just kind of put that in perspective, because you could get that one employee that just had a bad relationship with the owner. So you got to kind of mix that up a little bit. But you want to talk to the employees. You want to talk to the customers that come every day over there. And now, so we determined that Tropical Smoothie is a what? Is a franchise, right? So now you looked at Mr. Seller's tax returns, you looked at his lease, you're okay with that. What other thing you want to be paying attention to back there? Yes, yeah. What more?
I probably want to know like what responsibilities they have to the corporate stores, being a franchise, how much you owe them for the name, and what kind of
Yes, exactly. Because you are buying Tropical Smoothie name. So it's a name, it's a brand, it's a franchise. So do you think you can just come over and take over? There are other parties. So who's the other party in this?
Like the corporation itself.
The franchisor. And that would be Tropical Smoothie. Do you think that Tropical Smoothie want you just, Mr. Buyer, to come in just because he's offering some money to Mr. Seller? Why is that?
They wanted to see who's representing their name. Also, if it's a good location, maybe they want to take it over as a corporate store rather than a franchise store. So they may have other plans for it.
Usually what happens is in a franchise agreement, yes,
They just wanna make sure that the owner of their franchise is like trained.
yes, yeah. So they want to know, so you're now going to be entering into a separate relationship with the franchisor. Usually in a franchise, the goal is not for the corporate to come over and take over. That happens, but it's very, very rare. They're getting a franchise fee. So this is all about everybody making money. So franchisor is making, they get loyalty thing, and it's depending on your gross income. So they get fees. So for them to come over and take over because the business is doing well, it's not going to be good PR for the other franchisees. But as a franchisor, you want somebody to be over there to be responsible and to have the good name of Tropical Smoothie. You don't want any, Joe Blow on the street to run it because it could be disastrous. You guys heard of this strawberry thing with a Tropical Smoothie a few years ago? What happened to their sales? It just plummeted. And it wasn't locally, it happened somewhere else. But guess what? It hurt all the franchises. So you don't want any irresponsible person running their brand. So you have to do what? They have to, like when you got into CNU, didn't you do the interview process, application process? There you go. Franchisor wants to interview you and to see who you are. They want an application from you. They want to know what you're worth. They want to know whether you can cover your expenses. And they want to make sure you are not going to ruin their good name. So you have to go into a separate agreement with the franchise agreement. So they want to know what assets you have, and all that. Credit check, right? So the franchisor is going to run your credit. What do you want as a buyer? What do you want about this particular location? We talked about Google reviews, credit checks, right? Because you want to know if Mr. Seller owes anybody money. Do you think it's possible that you inherit his liability? Yes.
It's the name of the franchise.
Right. So, for example, Mr. Seller forgot to pay his Dominion Power 3 months ago. He owes $500. And if Mr. Buyer takes over the business, who do you think is going to be responsible for that payment of $500 of Dominion Power? Mr. Buyer. Why? Because he needs the electricity to run. And the Dominion Power doesn't care. What they'll do is they change the name, but if there's an outstanding bill, somebody needs to pay that. So as part of the agreement between Mr. Buyer and seller, what do you want to say on that contract? Don't you want to say something to cover yourself? Yes.
The seller is responsible for any outstanding expenses left over.
Yes, and you want all the expenses to be prorated. Now, what about the employees?
Any outstanding payments to wages and things like that.
Okay. Now, what happens? There is a manager there. The manager did not take vacation. He owes 2 weeks of vacation. And the new Mr. Buyer wants to, keep the manager because the manager knows what he's doing. Who is responsible for those 2 weeks of vacation that the manager did not take and wants to take? Anybody? But the manager wants that vacation, right? He's earned it. He should be able to take that vacation. So what do you say on the contract?
The seller's responsible for paid time off.
Yeah, you want to say that the seller is responsible for all expenses prorated and whatever outstanding vacation time to the employees. You want that on the contract as well. So those are things all negotiated, and we want to put it on there. Now, let's go back to the price now. That's a big thing, right? So we know that Mr. Buyer has $200,000. Mr. Seller, bought it for $240,000. What the likelihood that Mr. Seller would sell it less than $240,000?
Depends on how well the business is performing.
Yes, like all things, the answer is it depends. Let's say the business is doing well. So what do you think?
Then he would go less than 240, but if he's struggling and just wants to get out, he'll take anything.
Well, the business is doing well. He does want to get out because he's 62. He want to enjoy Florida and all that. Business is doing really well. In fact, he's made it really. He computerized everything. And yes.
You might want more for the business if it's doing really well because that's what he's giving up.
Right. So he's like he's very clear. I paid $240,000 for this business, and you represent the buyer, and the buyer says, how much do you want the buyer to negotiate?
He only has $200,000.
So what are you going to offer him? You're going to say, we only have $200,000.
You're gonna say like 190.
All right, you represent the seller. What do you say? They say, well, I only have $200,000. I'm going to offer you $190,000. What do you say? You represent the seller. After you go, you scoff and like, ha, no, like, I have millions of other people that want to say. But what do you say now?
I'd say that I'd want at least what I paid for it.
Yeah, yeah. Which is what?
$240,000.
All right. So you guys represent the buyer now. What do you think? Do you have a counteroffer to that? Because grandma left you $200,000.
Yeah, you could have savings.
He's a lender.
I mean, yeah, but you could be married to a millionaire.
Yes.
You could offer the 200 up front, but instead of buying out everything completely, you offer a small royalty to that person to help pay off the rest of the debt.
Right. Okay. Good. That's a very good point. The seller has no other debt. It's all paid for. Yeah. His grandmother was richer than your grandmother, so grandmother paid for the whole thing. Business is doing well, and in fact, he said, I was going to sell it for $270,000. So what do you think? You still only have $200,000. What are you going to do?
You as the buyer could go try to take out a $70,000 loan, or you could find a business partner that would be willing to go in with you and supply the rest of the cash.
Very good. That's what I would do. I'm not saying it's good because that's what I would do, but I'm like, that's a good idea. Now, as you represent either the buyer and the seller, the whole thing about this is to make it work. So now they want they said $270,000. So what are you going to offer? You're going to say, well, what do you say to that?
You could say 250.
250, and then what are you going to offer them? You say, I have 200,000 and
50,000 line of credit.
okay. So then that means 50,000 a line of credit. So do you put that in the contract?
I don't know. Maybe.
Well, what do you have? So you don't have that other $50,000, right? So on the contract, let's say you offer $250,000. Do you accept that $250,000?
Sure.
Okay, they say, yeah, that's good now. We have a deal. We have a good number. So you say $200,000 cash at closing, and this contract is contingent upon you getting
The $50,000.
$50,000 loan. Yes. So that, because you can't, where are you going to whip up $50,000? You got to put that in the contract. Otherwise, you'd be in default, right? So Now, what are the chances of a small business, like a bank, lending you $50,000 for a business? It may happen, depends, like all things, it depends on your line of credit. But it turned out Mr. Buyer had filed bankruptcy 6 years ago. So is the bank going to lend you the $50,000? No. You want to sell that business, right? So what are you going to do?
So there's no way for them to get the extra.
Yeah, it doesn't. Mr. Buyer tried and tried. He went to several banks, and they say, well, you're a good librarian and all, but we don't, you don't have a business experience, and you did file that bankruptcy 6 years ago when you went through that terrible divorce, so we can't lend you the $50,000. So, but you want to make it work. What do you do?
Maybe take the $200,000 and then have them owe you a certain amount every year.
Yes. That's what I would recommend. It's like, okay, you want to take the $200,000 up front, $200,000, and what you can do as a seller, because you want to make it work, we'll do owner's financing. Does anybody know what owner's financing is? Owner's financing is kind of like you, the seller, is a bank. So what you're going to say is, okay, I will take the $200,000. I'm going to give you sign a promissory note to pay me back the $50,000. Okay, so as a seller, what more do you want on that promissory note? Yes, what do you want in your interest?
Interest in a timeline?
Absolutely, you want the interest in a timeline. So what kind of interest are you looking at? It's a small business. And no bank is gonna lend Mr. Buyer money. So you can charge them higher, yes. But you don't want to say it so much so that because Mr. Buyer has to run, and you as a seller know how much you're doing, how much net income you're generating per month. So you don't want to call out a number that's just impossible for the buyer to perform, right? So but you can charge a little higher because the banks are not going to lend them the money, but you're motivated because you want to make this transaction work.
Does the usury laws apply in this type of situation, or is that only for credit card companies and things like that?
Probably just credit card companies. This is between the buyer, the buyer, between just two people. Now, as a seller, what is your biggest concern? Now, you decide to do owner's financing. You say, I'm going to give it to you at 8% interest rate over 3 years, let's say, and you do the amortization and how much it comes up with. What's your biggest concern?
That they won't make the money to be able to pay it.
That is your biggest concern, that the buyer will not pay and you won't get that money. So what are you going to do about that to protect yourself? When you buy a house, and nobody, very few people buy all upfront cash, right? You buy a $300,000 house, nobody has $300,000 under the mattress, right? You get a mortgage loan, right? And what does the mortgage company do with that house? Use it as a collateral. So you get so the bank, so you actually don't own that house. The bank owns that house, right? So what happens is if you default on that payment, what happens? The bank comes over and take over the house, right? Foreclosure, it's called foreclosure. Now, Mr. Buyer owes you $50,000. What kind of security do you want? Yes.
Okay, I know you pointed out not too long ago, but I was just gonna say see if he has any kind of, because you said that he filed bankruptcy a few years ago. So I was just curious if he would even have anything to put up for collateral.
Anybody know what the collateral would be? It is the business. Why? He invested $200,000 in that business. So what you want is some kind of a security agreement.
So would you just take back ownership? Would you just take back ownership?
Yeah, why not? So what you want is at the end, at the closing, you want Mr. Buyer to sign a promissory note to pay you back $50,000 at 8% over 3 years. But if he defaults, you have the you got to put that all in writing. That's why you guys need to go to law school, okay? So you can come over and take over the tropical smoothie, and you can do that.
He doesn't want to, though.
The buyer,
He would sell it to someone else.
the seller, but this business, what he can come over and take over. What would he do? Sell it again to Mr. Buyer number 2, right? Okay. Any other questions about this before we move on to case number 2? Am I boring you?
No.
All right. And all these are, if you think this is unusual, it's not unusual. This happens every day in transaction. I'm going to talk about Ikes Market. Okay, Ike and his wife owned a small grocery store on Warwick Boulevard. Everything happens on Warwick Boulevard. He's owned it for 30 years. All the neighbors love him. The grocery is called Ikes Market. He's been there for many years. A few months ago, Ike's wife suddenly died from overworking. And Ike is, almost 70 years old. He decided that he doesn't want to operate the grocery without his wife. Understandable, because a lot of the small businesses are being operated by what? Family members. So he's going to be turning 70. His children said, "Dad, we don't want to, we don't want to have anything to do with Ikes Market. We want to go to business school, go to CNU. We don't want to do Ikes Market. You need to sell that." So he wants to sell. Now he incorporated this, many years ago. Ike and his wife own the building where Ikes Market is. He's paid $200,000 for the real estate 30 years ago, and he built his own grocery store. Now Bobby is a sales rep, and he's a sales rep for a local milk company, and he's been delivering milk to Ikes Market for years. So he knows how well the business is doing. It's a corner market. Everybody knows each other. They come by. So Bobby wants to purchase Ikes Market. You represent Bobby. All right, you guys. You represent Bobby. What is the first thing you want to ask to Ike? You want to purchase this. So we already talked about having a contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want on the contract?
You would ask for, you would probably ask for his financial statements as well to see if he can even afford to invest in the business. You would ask, like you said before, how interested in the business are you? What is your background knowledge in it? Are you going to have a partner? Is it just going to be you? Who's going to support you in running this business if they don't have any knowledge on running a business to begin with?
Okay, so you want to know this thing, but you don't want to discourage them from purchasing, because you want to able to have Bobby own part of that American dream of owning a business. So, right? You represent Bobby. So you said, okay, Bobby, give me your financials and let me see if we can afford this. Yes.
Also, since it's a local favorite, what is the view of the milk that he's selling? Do they already have a good view in the community? Because then once the ownership is transferred over, you want to make sure that it's going to continue being favorable, because if the customers don't like who's the new owner,
Mm-hmm.
it's a grocery store, they can go somewhere else.
Right. So you want to, but how do you value this Ikes Market? Is there a value? Yes.
I think you have to determine whether Bobby wants to buy the actual property and the business, or if he's looking just to buy the business.
Right. Those things, because we know Ike paid $200,000 for the building. Now, is the building part of the business?
Yeah.
It
It's
is.
not part of the business, but it's where it's housed, so it's a separate entity.
It's two separate entities. You have a lot going on in this very simple scenario. Why? Because who's the landlord here? Ike. Right. So Ike is smart. He's well, I'm 70, but I need he needs disposable income. So he's going to rent it out to Bobby. Bobby purchases Ikes Market, the grocery store. Now, how do you put a value on a grocery store that's been for 30 years and that is part of Ike? It's become synonymous, right? And Ike's well, I don't know how much to charge you. I don't know. It's a grocery store back there. What would be the first thing that you'd be thinking about when you put a value on this Ikes Market that's been a local favorite for years?
Well, if it's just a
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's for the business, I mean, the survey would be just enough to find out.
Is it what?
The survey would be enough to find out the popularity of the Ikes Market around. Just have a survey to see if they know the market,
Mm-hmm.
and if they would shop there most of the time. And then like that, you can see the popularity. And then if positive popularity, then you can increase the price to whatever you want.
Yeah. So you have two things going on. One is, you know, the real estate of the lease, how much is it gonna be? Because I just kind of like paid himself, you know, it was to him, it's the same thing. But when you're purchasing, it's two separate transactions here. One is a lease agreement. You can't do one without the other. So we know the real estate's worth at least $200,000. What do? You go to the city assessor's office to find out the value of the real property. It's on there, right? But for business, it's kind of hard to say. But you start with what? If you're purchasing the business, what you start with what? What we discussed earlier. Exactly. So you want to see Ike's tax returns for the business, and that shows you how much what? How much revenue he's had, what expenses on there. So that's a good number. Now, does the name Ikes Market have any value? He's been there for 30 years. Everybody loves him. Yeah. So you wouldn't want to call it Bobby's Market, right? Everybody knows it's an Ikes Market. You don't want to change that. So you start with a tax return. Let's say he grossed, I don't know, $1 million last year. And then expenses, and then you want to figure out. So you're negotiating with Ike. And you say, and they're good buddies. Ike and Bobby are good friends. And Ike says, you know what, Bobby, you've been loyal to me for all these years. If I'm going to sell it, I'm going to sell it to you. Ike says, I want $500,000 for the store. Bobby says, are you nuts? I don't have that kind of money. But you start with always a tax return, right? And what you want to do is go to the other stores similarly and figure out how much they're going for. And you can easily do that by talking to what? Other real estate agents that represent commercial businesses, right? Now, what are you buying when you buy a grocery store back there? What are you buying?
You're buying, like you said, the name itself.
Good. That's goodwill, right? Goodwill. The goodwill has always a value on that. Yes. What else?
You're buying, like, if you can like take over the contracts you have with certain like product dealers. So like if you have a contract with like you said, a certain type of milk, that it's like set at a price. Maybe you're getting the same thing every week.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. Everything else.
Right. Yep.
You're also getting like the location, but so then those customers, because like there's a grocery store 2 minutes from my house. No matter what grocery store was there, but that's where my parents would shop. So
Mhm.
it's like you're getting the same customers because everyone goes to the local like close grocery store. usually.
Right. And what else?
You're also getting the physical inventory,
Hmm?
so the shelves and the milk.
Yes.
and
You're getting the physical inventory. You're also getting the equipment like refrigerators, cash registers, and all those things. In a grocery store, when you walk into 7-Eleven, what do you see? All these grocery inventory of goods, products. How do you put a value on that one? So when Ike says he wants $500,000, he thinks like the goodwill itself is worth at least $200,000. He may or may not be right, but you can negotiate it down. And if you represent Bobby, what are you going to say? Does the $500,000 include inventory? And Ike says, no, hell no, it's not worth that. But how do you do the inventory when you do this transaction? Yes.
like, yeah, like there's probably like a set amount of like, obviously the grocery store has to have like a list of inventory of what they currently have, and then you can look at it either from like how much I paid for it, like wholesale, versus how much he makes on it, the turnaround selling it to like an average customer, and kind of like negotiate in between there. And obviously Ike doesn't want to sell the business, and then also, but then not sell the inventory. So like he might be able to sell it below market value, as like part of the wholesale agreement.
Inventory in a grocery store is a point of hot contention for a lot of transactions. Why? Because this is mom and pop store for Ike. What are the chances that he has a list of inventory that is not? I mean, you'd be surprised how many Snickers bars there are in a grocery store, how many Butterfingers and all those things, nuts, pounds of nuts. And what usually happens, because it's like anything else in between buyer and seller, you have like a relationship. So I think he has, $100,000 worth of inventory. Does Bobby likes Ike, they like each other, but does he really know if he's got $100,000 worth of inventory? The answer is no. What usually happens in a grocery store is they'll say, okay, we will, and let's say they come to an agreement. Bobby agrees to pay Ike $200,000, and that's the goodwill, shelving, refrigeration, cash registers, and all those things. He's going to say $200,000 plus inventory. Now, how do we do the inventory plus inventory? Does anybody know how people do inventories in a grocery store? So let's say, because what happens is you give them like due diligence period. Let's say today is March 26th. We're going to close on April 26th. What does the word close mean? That means a settlement, right? So when you say $200,000 plus inventory, so you do due diligence during that 1 month, check out, Ike's tax returns and all those things. The day before the closing, let's say you're going to close April 26th at 9 a.m., what you do is hire an inventory company. They come and they will spend all night figuring out how many broccolis you have, how many cans of Coke you have, and then how do they do that inventory then? Does anybody have this is really interesting because I've seen it. How do you think the inventory companies do? Let's say, how much do they charge like a bottle of water in a refrigerator when you go to 7-Eleven? Let's say $1, right? How do you think inventory companies do that? They'll come and they count and.
Do they have like a scanning system to like count and like register how much of everything there is?
Right, they could have but they say, okay, we have 20 bottles of water in the refrigerator, and they're $1 each. So they do, 20 bottles of water. 50 cans of Diet Coke, and let's say they're like, I don't know, $1, the other $1 on those. They do all those, and they're what? Retail prices, because that's how Mike. And then what do you do with that retail? And you come up with this huge number. Let's say it's like $80,000 at retail price. Does Bobby pay Ike $80,000 worth of inventory? Why? Okay.
If you were to pay $80,000 for it and then you were to sell it all, you'd be break even and you want to be able to make money off of it.
That's retail, right? So, right. So how do you do the wholesale price from that? You take the $80,000 and then this is all part of the contract. This is why the contract is so important. So you say, Bobby pays Ike $200,000 plus inventory, and then you put it on somewhere in that contract, put in parentheses, at wholesale price. But what are the chances of Ike figuring out how much he paid for that Diet Coke? No. So what you do is put the formula there. What do you think is a typical markup for a grocery store?
20%?
That's a good number. Depends if you are a huge market like E-Mart, Farm Fresh, those things. It could be somewhere between 5 to 15%. If you're a mom and pop store or 7-Eleven, the markup is going to be more than 30%. So what you'd say is $80,000 and take 30% of that as markup, and you pay, Bobby pays like 30% less than the retail price, and you come up with a number. Okay? Now, if you are Bobby, what is your next concern when you decide to purchase this? Licenses. Anybody worry about the licenses? Now, Ike has formed this corporation a few years ago. He's got business license under Ike. He's got, what else? Anybody familiar with ABC? What does ABC stand for?
Tobacco licenses.
Right, and tobacco licenses, and the other thing is ABC, alcoholic beverage control. Did you know you have to get a separate license for that? But if you buy a corporation, what happens?
You have to get a new license.
Hmm?
You have to get a new license, like in your name.
In your name, but if you buy Ike's Corporation, what happens?
Don't you get his license?
You do, because Ike's Corporation, what does it say? It's been a corporation it's become Ikes Market Incorporated. So if he buys the corporation, what comes with it? All the licenses come with it. What else do you get when you assume the corporation? Do you know?
Like the liability and the debt.
Yes, that liability comes with that corporation because it's one single entity. Bobby didn't know, but Ike had a judgment against him. His wife, before she died, she got into a terrible accident, and she rear-ended somebody, and there's a $50,000 judgment against Ike's wife. Is that going to impact Ikes Market Incorporated? Back there, you shaking your head. Why? Yes. Yes. Because wife was a separate entity. Now, Ike caused that accident, and there's a judgment against Ike, 50,000. What do you say?
Well, it's not a bad business move, so there's no reason to pierce the corporate veil to get it removed.
Yeah, because you think Ike did it personally, right?
Yeah, he did personally. It wasn't a business decision that would hurt the business.
Okay. Now, Ike was delivering something for one of his customers because the woman, a really good customer, she was, she was in bed, she had the bad flu, and he has a big delivery truck says Ikes Market. He was on his way to deliver the goods to this woman, got into a bad accident, $50,000 judgment. Does that impact the business?
But insurance will take care of that.
He didn't have insurance. Well, he did have insurance, but he had a cap, $25,000 liability cap. So the insurance company paid $25,000. So there's a judgment out for another $25,000. Will that impact the business? So what do we say in the contract? Who has to pay it? Well, there's a judgment out there, and Bobby assumed the corporation. Who's responsible now?
It already happened, and Bobby.
Yeah, it happened like 2 years ago. Judgment is still there.
We're still in contract.
Well, but Bobby, so why do this becomes important. What do you say in the contract? Because Bobby does not know about this outstanding judgment and all that. So what do you say in the contract?
He has to pay all outstanding expenses.
What you have to say is you want to have Ike sign this agreement that says the seller agrees to indemnify the buyer of all expenses or judgments that have occurred before the sale or the closing of the business. Let's say this accident happened like 2 years ago, and Bobby and even Ike didn't know he was going to get sued. He gets sued after the transaction. The accident happened 2 years ago, and Ikes Market Incorporated gets sued a month after Bobby takes over. Who is responsible for that?
And he signed this thing at Ike.
Yes, who do you think?
Bobby.
Why?
He now owns Ikes Incorporated,
Right,
but he could put on a clause that
yes,
any previous
right.
liability falls on Ike.
Right. Even though the notice came a month after Bobby took over, if you put in that's why you would need what is called indemnification agreement. This happens, it's called, and you could be part of the contract or you could make it into a separate contract as both parties sign. It's called indemnification clause. So anything that happened before Bobby took over, but received notice afterwards, Ike will be responsible. And then also, what you don't want is, let's say Bobby got into trouble with food stamp people. Everybody knows what food stamp is, isn't it? So he gets in trouble and he gets penalized $10,000. Bobby's doing this, but it's under Ikes Market Incorporated. So, Ikes Market Incorporated get penalized $10,000. Food stamp people send him this penalty to Ike. He's at home resting and doing all that. Is Ike responsible? So he goes to Bobby, and Bobby has run off. He's closed shop and run off. What would you do if you represent Ike?
Sue.
Huh?
Hope to God he's coming back.
People pray a lot. But anyway, that doesn't solve the problem. So if Bobby has absconded, what's your remedy for Ike? He owns the building, remember? He still does, and Bobby's just ran off. Locked the store up, the goods are still there, hadn't paid the employees, he's just run off. Do you think that's never happened before in the business world? It happens. So you represent Ike. What would you advise him to do?
Sell the business again.
Yep. So open shop, take over the business, get one of you to represent him, and one of you to market the idea and sell the business, because he's still the landlord, and he can clean that up. But if you're a landlord, you're in a very good position, because you have a huge interest in that leasehold that also counts for business. All right, and my time is up, I think. Anybody question?
Does anyone have any questions about negotiations in general you want to add? Kim?
Yes.
Ryan?
How do you set the starting price?
Excuse me?
How do you set the starting price? Like when you start negotiating, how do you get that level? How do you get to what the middle price or the higher price that you want to start with so that you can negotiate down? How would you calculate that?
I think the first thing you want to do is you want to see a similar business and how much it's sold for in surrounding areas. So if you know like 7-Eleven is sold for X, that's a huge reference point. And you want to get the history of the same business that's transferred. And negotiation, by the way, is not just limited to business. You all know this, but divorces is one of the tools is to negotiate between soon-to-be ex-husband and wife and all that. Now, if you have very few assets, what do you negotiate about? The kids. But that's always. But the most interesting recently has been negotiating about the debt, because there's a huge debt. Nobody wants debt, but that's what you negotiate. Now, if you're billionaires, you fight over how many houses and all that. But when when you don't have that much, but you have lots of debt, you negotiate on who gets more debt than the others. So I encourage you all to pursue your studies and negotiate on your way. Thanks.